Hi, this is Jeff Blauette, technical agronomist with Cooperative Farmers Elevator. And on this week's Field Friday segment, we're kind of been talking about all these management practices we can be doing on this late season corn and beans. We're kind of done with that, but as we're starting to see some real late season things show up, I wanted to touch on something that's kind of new that is becoming more prevalent the last couple of years. It's gotten a lot of press, the gall midge larvae. Everybody's talked about it. There's lots of press on that it's something new we hadn't seen prior to about 3 or 4 years ago. There's a little bit of a research effort starting to go on with several of the universities in the upper Midwest here, Nebraska and Iowa State and South Dakota State and Minnesota and maybe others. There's a consortium right now going on where they're trying to figure out what to do and how to manage this pest. Right now we don't really know of any management that we can do for it, but I want to show you what it looks like and what we're seeing. So now is typically the time in the western part of our trade territory where we start going around fields and you'll start to see dead plants showing up as you're driving by, in the waterway or along the road or whatever. And historically we've blamed that on white mold, and it's been what it has in the past. But as we start going out into some of these fields and seeing some of these dead plants along the edges, it's not all white mold. Matter of fact, I've got a field here where I've got both to show. Both of these plants, as you can kind of see, they've kind of just started to die. They're starting to wilt and wither, starting to turn brown with the sun bleaching on them. But as you can see with this one, this is our typical white mold look. Sometimes 8 to 10, 12, 14 inches up the stem, there's a dead area and it's got white mold on it. Chokes that plant off, that plant's dead. That's typically what white mold looks like. We're used to seeing this. This is the first time I've seen them both in a field together, and that's why this is a good example field. But this plant is also starting to wither and die, but it's not showing white mold like we normally see it. We've got some white mold looking damage on the bottom, but that's at the soil level, and that's not typically where we see white mold, and it is a different look to it. So this is kind of the beginning of the damage of what the gall midge larvae leave behind. They're feeding on the inside of that stem, but I'll show you in a minute what that looks like in the soil level. But this is a visual of what you'll see in some of these plants before they die. And I'll show you another example here. As we push them, that typically is a brittle spot on the stem, and we'll find the larvae in there. I have a picture here of a stem that, as you can see, we've got probably half a dozen very visual orange of this real small larvae that have been feeding inside of this plant, and they're the ones that have done all the damage. These have been feeding for a while, but they finally did enough damage where they killed the plant. So basically the things everybody wants to know, so what do we do about it? Well, right now we don't know. That's why the research effort is going on. A couple of years ago, they kind of thought maybe if they would time it actually in V2 to V3 soybeans, which is, back in June, early June, they were having some success with applying some pyrethroid insecticides. That timed out shortly after their hatch, so they did some really effective things from a yield perspective and protecting areas where they tested that. So everybody was excited. In 2020, they tried the same thing, timed the same way, and it really was not effective at all. So basically, we don't know what strategies are going to be helpful yet on how to manage this pest. This pest typically overwinters in grass. We're in a waterway here on the edge of the waterway where we're seeing the damage. They basically will hatch there, infest the edge of the field as far as we know. We don't know how far they go in necessarily yet, and I imagine it depends on how many are here. As time goes on, the population increases, they may go farther into the field, but we don't know yet. Last year in this particular field right across the waterway, we had the same thing, and now that's corn and this is beans, so now they're over here. So that's some of the things that we'd want to watch. Fields along the ditches, grass waterways, maybe even grass back terraces. Those edges maybe are susceptible. There's, like I say, at this point, there's nothing we can do about it that they've found is effective. But obviously the research effort has just begun, and they have some stuff they were testing this year that I haven't heard of results yet. But I would recommend that you maybe consider going out and looking along some of these field edges, and if you see dead plants, don't assume it's white mold or some other disease. We should know what it is so we have an opportunity to maybe manage next year. Like this, in this particular field, we know they're probably going to be across the waterway, or if this was a road ditch, you would say maybe if this is your field on either side, maybe it's going to be there. That would be the first suspected locations we would find. But let's look at it in the field. I went out into this field and I have a little video to show you what we're looking at with both of them side by side. With these dead plants that are starting to wither here amongst the live plants, it looks like historically what white mold would look like. And as we look, we do have a plant here showing white mold is making that plant showing up as it's starting to dry and die. We have another plant here that's doing the same thing, but as we look at the bottom, we can see that that plant is showing the gall midge damage down here that has killed that plant. Now that we've kind of seen what they look like in the field, let's look at a row with some damaged beans in it and what they're going to do as we push on them. So you can see along the base of these plants we have some more of this kind of this whitish growth there right at the soil level. You can see here's a plant that's already cracked off. You can see as I push, notice how that one cracks. This one cracks. As we go farther along the edge here, there's some more you can see. They're going to crack. See, this one's cracked off. As you put pressure on, it's like a brittle stalk in corn. They crack off, and that's the damage that we're worried about. Just as the idea here we're looking at is just to make you aware for future management. We've got a new pest that we're still learning with, but that's kind of the way Mother Nature treats us sometimes. So with that, that's this week's Field Friday segment, and we'll see you next week.